The morning of the unmaking began at 6:42. The phone buzzed. A fat, lazy beetle of light and sound on the worn oak of the kitchen table. I picked it up, my thumb smearing the sleep from my eye, and saw Linda's name. The message was a masterpiece of economy. Plans changed. You're not coming on the cruise. Emily wants her real dad. I read it. Then I read it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something human. The coffee pot behind me issued a final, sputtering hiss, burning the last inch of Sumatra dark. The ancient AM radio on the counter murmured a commodity report from Cedar Rapids, soybean futures, hog prices. Outside, the old sugar maple by the driveway shuddered in a sudden gust, sending a skittering rush of early fall leaves across the concrete. A frantic exodus. I placed the phone face down. It vibrated almost immediately. A dull, angry thrum against the wood. I didn't flip it. Instead, I lowered myself into the chair at the head of the table. My chair. The one that faced the big window overlooking the yard. The one Linda had always called, your spot, with a tone that hovered between endearment and designation. The coffee in my mug cooled. Forgotten. 14 years. That's what flashed behind my eyes. Not as a memory, but as a physical weight. 14 years since I'd backed a U-Haul up to this very house on East Locust Street. My worldly possessions, a sagging plaid couch, a red metal toolbox from my father, and a nervous, swelling promise in my chest. Emily was 12 then, a watchful, wiry ghost of a girl with braces on the horizon. Her father, Rick Donnelly, was already a fading photograph, a presence defined by his absences. It's just us now, Linda had said that first evening, passing me a cold beer on the back steps. The condensation soaked into my palm. We're a family. That phrase became the liturgy of our life, recited at every transaction. When I wrote the check for Emily's orthodontia, Linda squeezed my bicep. Your money is our money, Mark. That's what family means. When I dipped into the savings account, the one labeled rainy day, to buy Emily's used Honda Civic after she got into Iowa State, Linda beamed. This is what dads do. And when I finally set up the auto debit for the Mississippi River anniversary cruise, the one she'd circled in brochures left casually on my pillow, she'd kissed the corner of my mouth. We deserve this, after everything. The text did not say, we. It said, my real family. The phone buzzed again. A trapped thing. I stood, my joints stiff, carried the full mug to the sink, and poured the cold coffee down the drain. It hit the porcelain with a sound like a disappointed sigh. I rinsed the mug meticulously, watching the last tendril of steam rise and vanish into the dull kitchen light. When I picked up the phone, it was a voicemail notification. I knew the voice before I played it. Linda's tone was clipped, efficient, tinged with the faintest irritation, as if I were a stubborn child refusing to put on a coat. Mark, don't make this into a whole drama. It's just, Emily asked for this. You understand, right? It's about her. Call me when you've calmed down. Calm down. I braced my hips against the counter's edge, closed my eyes, and was ambushed by a memory so vivid it stole my breath. Emily, at that same kitchen table, 14 years younger, her face a mess of tears and frustration over a sprawl of algebra homework. Rick had forgotten her again. A no-show for a weekend that had been promised. I'd pulled out the chair beside her, not the head chair, and sat down. Okay, kiddo, I'd said, my voice softer than I knew it could be. Let's figure this out together. The smile that broke through her tears was lopsided, fragile with a relief so profound it hollowed me out. She had been holding her breath, waiting for someone to stay. I played the voicemail again. This time, I heard the rehearsal in it, the careful choice of drama, the strategic deployment of it's about her. A script designed to make any protest an act of selfishness. By 9:30, autopilot engaged. I was supposed to be in Dubuque. I shrugged on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and paused in the hallway, arrested by the gallery of our life. One photo in particular, taken the year we refinanced to replace the roof. Linda and Emily sat close together on the couch, smiling identical, closed-mouth smiles. I stood slightly apart, one hand resting on the back cushion, my body angled as if I'd just wandered into the frame and wasn't sure I was permitted to stay. I'd never seen it before. The dealership visit was a pantomime. I shook hands, made agreeable noises, nodded at charts, When the regional manager asked about Q3 projections, I stared at him blankly until he repeated himself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a series of short, insistent tremors against my thigh. I let them die. On the drive back, I pulled into a Casey's General Store. Parking at the far edge of the lot, I sat with the engine running, the heater blasting, and let the phone ring itself to voicemail. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. A vault door ceiling in a deep, quiet place. I thought of calling my sister in Moline. I thought of calling my friend Tom, a Vietnam vet who held court at the VFW. I even, for a wild second, thought of calling Rick Donnelly's last known number, just to ask him what kind of man cashes a check another man spent 14 years earning. I drove home. The house was a tomb of orderly silence. Linda had caught an early flight. Our bedroom was pristine, the comforter stretched tight as a drumhead, hotel room sterile. I returned to the kitchen, to the head chair, and looked at the 3 empty placemats. I could see them with cruel clarity, Linda and Emily at the ship's rail, laughing into a wind I couldn't feel, Rick standing behind them, his hands possessive on their shoulders, claiming the horizon I'd paid for. The phone buzzed. A new text, this time from Emily's number. No preface, no apology, just, please respect our space. I looked at the words until they dissolved into meaningless pixels. I did not throw the phone. I did not roar. I turned it face down and slid it away from me, the way you might sidestep a live wire lying in a puddle. The AM radio, left on all day, clicked to the local news. The broadcaster's voice was a smooth baritone discussing river levels, navigational warnings for barges, the comings and goings of pleasure craft. I sat there as the afternoon light bled away, letting the cold, hard truth settle in my gut. This wasn't a spat. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a referendum, and the votes, all of them, had been cast against me, years ago, while I was busy playing the part of the man who fixes things. I stood. I took the chair at the head of the table, the symbol of a responsibility I had embraced and a belonging I had been denied, and pushed it firmly, finally, under the table. Then I picked up my phone and turned off all notifications. The silence that descended wasn't empty. It was fertile ground. Sleep that night was not sleep. It was a shallow trench where my mind patrolled the same perimeter. My real family. My real family. My real family. The phrase was a shard of glass in the bedclothes. At 5:30, I surrendered. I shaved with mechanical precision, dressed in the dark, and made a fresh pot of coffee. I drank it standing at the counter, watching the world lighten through the window over the sink. The house felt different, not mine, but not theirs either. A neutral zone. Out of habit, I checked the phone. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails. I deleted them unheard. The drive to work was soundtracked by the AM radio's phantoms. Voices melting from evangelical fervor into talk of interest rates and into static rates. I thought about the word, like the tide, inexorable. You didn't curse it. You built your seawall higher. By 10, a fine tremor had taken up residence in my hands. I told Cheryl, my assistant, I had a migraine. I drove not to the clinic, but to the Davenport Community Credit Union, where I'd opened my first account at 19. Susan, behind the counter for 20 of those years, greeted me with her customary, unwavering smile. Morning, Mark. What can we do for you today? I need to see everything, I said, my voice surprisingly level. All the accounts, every transaction for the last year. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. She asked for my ID. Then her fingers danced across the keyboard. The screen pivoted toward me. There it was, the financial anatomy of my life, the direct deposits, the mortgage draft, the utilities, the insurance, and there, scheduled for the following week, the auto debit to Great River Cruise Lines, a significant sum, all from my account. Everything looking in order? Susan asked, her voice carefully neutral. Just taking stock, I said, requesting printouts. Back in my truck, I spread the pale green sheets on the passenger seat. The paper smelled of ozone and warmth. I traced the columns of numbers with a fingertip. The story they told was no longer one of shared endeavor, but of singular subsidy. The numbers were cold. They were also curiously clarifying. That evening, I bypassed the turn onto East Locust. I drove instead to the VFW post on West 3rd. The air inside was a familiar blanket of fryer grease. pine-scented disinfectant, and old smoke. I took a stool at the quiet end of the bar. I didn't have to wait long. Walt Prendergast materialized beside me, his navy cap so faded it was almost gray. He was 80, maybe older, a man who had seen entire worlds change. He assessed me with a single glance from his watery blue eyes. "You look like 10 miles of bad road, son." "Feels like 20, I grunted. I gave him the broad strokes, the text, the exile, the 14-year preamble. Walt listened, sipping his bourbon. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered an observation. "People show you who they are, Mark. Most times, we're just too busy building what we hope they are to read the sign. Sounds like they just took down the scaffolding." "I don't want to burn it all down, Walt." He set his glass down with a decisive click. "Then don't. A controlled demolition's a smarter thing. Build your next thing on fresh ground. Ground they don't have a map to." The phrase controlled demolition echoed in my head as I drove home. It felt right. It felt like a plan. In the spare room, I yanked open the filing cabinet. The metal drawer screamed in protest, a sound of pure Midwest anguish. Inside were the fossils of my providence, warranties for appliances long dead, tax returns, and a dozen labeled folders. I found the one marked Emily. It was a chronological ledger of my fatherhood, the orthodontist's payment plan, my signature next to responsible party, the invoice from Midas for the Honda's transmission rebuild. The most haunting documents were the bank slips for her college fund. $200 here, $50 there, a slow, steady drip from my paycheck over a decade. I remembered brown bagging it, skipping the guys' lunches at the diner, telling myself it was for her future, our future. Then, tucked behind a statement from last year, I found a different set of slips. Mini statements from an online bank I didn't use. Transfers, $200 to an account numbered 1147, $150 a month later, $300 just last week. The recipient, M. Donnelly. Not a fortune, but a steady, secret diversion. A nest egg being feathered in a nest I wasn't allowed in. I didn't feel a surge of anger. I felt a deep, settling cold, the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, revealing a picture I'd refused to see. My phone buzzed on the desk, casting a frantic blue light across the financial evidence. I watched it dance, then go dark. The next morning, I called the cruise line. The customer service agent had a voice like warm syrup. "And your reason for cancellation, sir?" "I am no longer part of the party," I said, in any sense of the word. There was a pause, the soft clatter of a keyboard. "Processed. A refund will be issued to the original form of payment in 7 to 10 business days." Next, I called the lawyer whose name Susan at the credit union had quietly written on the back of her business card. His office was in a converted Victorian in downtown Davenport. He was young, maybe 40, with a sharp mind behind a disarmingly casual demeanor. He scanned the deed, the mortgage documents, the bank statements. "The house is solely in your name," he confirmed, looking up. "Purchased pre-marriage. You have all the equity. You can list it tomorrow." "And Linda?" "She's a resident. That's a separate issue from ownership. An inconvenient one, but not an immovable one." He templed his fingers. "The financial separations here are quite clear. This could move quickly, if you're decisive." Decisive. I drove home under a flat, gray sky, the lawyer's words mixing with Walt's. Controlled demolition. Fresh ground. I sat at the head of the table, my table, in my house, and spread the documents before me. The phone was silent, a dead weight. The anger hadn't come. In its place was a vast, weary certainty. I had been an architect, believing I was building a home. I had merely been pouring a foundation for others to build upon without me. I waited a full, quiet day. I needed the silence to become a habit, a new language. On the second morning, I called Karen Whitfield, a realtor I'd met once at a block party. Her voice was brisk, professional. "Karen, it's Mark Fletcher, 2417 East Locust. I need to sell it." She didn't miss a beat. "I'll pull comps and be there tomorrow at 10. Walking through my own house with Karen was a surreal out-of-body experience. I saw it through her eyes, the slightly dated kitchen, the durable carpet, the strong bones, good schools, quiet street. "It'll move," she said, tapping a wall. Then, softer, "and Linda is away." I'll handle all communications. My voice left no room for debate. She gave a single, understanding nod. Just be ready. When she finds out, it's going to get noisy. The noise, I said, looking around at the walls that had absorbed so much of my quiet labor, is why I'm selling. The calls started that night. I was in the basement, packing old National Geographics into a banker's box, when the phone on the workbench lit up. Linda Mobile. It rang until it stopped. Then it rang again, and again. On the fourth cycle, I listened to the voicemail. Her tone had shed all pretense of conciliation. It was pure, spiked frustration. Mark, this is childish. Stop whatever you're doing. You're embarrassing everyone. Rick is here and he thinks you're being completely irrational. Rick is here. The final confirmation. I deleted the message. Then I powered the phone off. The little glowing Apple icon fading to black. The silence it left was total and delicious. The offer from Ben and Alyssa Morales came in 3 days later. A young Army medic and his teacher wife, expecting their first child, eager for a yard. Their letter, attached to the offer, mentioned the feeling of home they got from the porch. Karen presented it, noting they'd asked for a small credit for a new fence. I thought of the head chair, pushed in. I thought of the quiet. Give them the credit, I said, and accept the offer. Signing day was a bloodless affair in a beige title company office. The fluorescent lights hummed a high, steady note. I signed where the yellow arrows pointed. Mark Fletcher. Mark Fletcher. Mark Fletcher. My hand steady. The final signature felt not like a loss, but a release, a transfer of weight. As I stood, shaking the hand of the title agent, a familiar, muffled vibration began in my jacket pocket. The phone, resurrected by the movement, buzzing against my chest. I didn't reach for it. I walked out into the sharp autumn afternoon, the folded settlement statement crisp in my hand, the buzzing a distant, irrelevant insect sound. I had crossed the line they drew, and I was not looking back. The fresh ground was ahead, and for the first time in 14 years, the space I had to fill was mine alone. The text from Emily came on a Tuesday afternoon, after the sale but before the silence had fully set in. It was 2 lines, with the hollow, coached politeness of a hostage negotiator. Dad Much, please don't do anything drastic. I stared at the words. Dad Much. The former hyphenate she'd only ever used when explaining me to new friends. Please. The word Linda used when she meant we'd better not. I held the phone. The cheap laminate of the diner table cool under my other wrist. Outside, a late November wind bullied trash across the empty Muscatine parking lot. I typed my reply slowly, with one finger, the way you might carve a message into stone you know will weather. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. I sent it. Then I turned the phone screen down next to the ketchup bottle. The waitress, whose name tag read D, refilled my coffee without asking. Rough day? She murmured, not really expecting an answer. Just a long one, I said, and she nodded like she'd heard that before. I packed the truck that night, not in a frenzy, but with a methodical clarity that felt like waking from a long, confusing dream. I took only what mattered, my father's toolbox, the heavy, scratched metal smelling of old grease and honesty, a box of photographs, but only the ones from before, my parents, my sister, a fishing trip with Tom from the VFW, my good boots, my winter coat, the files, still in their heavy envelope. I left everything else exactly where it was, my books on the shelf, my shirts in the closet, the set of steak knives we'd gotten as a wedding gift, still pristine in their block. It wasn't a home I was leaving, it was a set. I pulled out of the driveway at 4:17 a.m., the truck's headlights painting the familiar shapes of the mailbox, the sugar maple, the porch swing. In the rearview mirror, the house on East Locust Street looked exactly as it always had, solid, silent, a monument to an idea. They were somewhere on the dark, glittering Mississippi, $1,000 bottle of champagne bubbling in a bucket of ice, raising a toast to their real family. I was driving west on Highway 22, watching the sun crack the horizon like a raw egg over the flat, sleeping fields, and for the first time in years, I took a breath that didn't catch on something sharp on the way down. They came back on a Tuesday. I know because Karen's text arrived at 3:18 p.m., as blunt and unadorned as a police report. They're there now. I was in the same diner, in the same vinyl booth, The coffee tasted like it always did, bitter, thin, a faithful companion to the truth. I didn't respond. I set the phone down beside my plate, folded my hands, and watched a fly navigate the impossible geography of the sugar dispenser. I waited. The phone lit up 5 minutes later. Linda Mobile. I let it ring. 5 minutes after that. Emily. I watched the screen until it went dark. Later, Karen would fill in the details with the detached precision of a crime scene photographer. Linda had pulled into the driveway straight from the airport, the rental car's trunk still packed with sun-bleached luggage and the faint, salty smell of river water. She was laughing at something, Karen said, her head thrown back. Emily followed, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes, thumbs scrolling on her phone. At first, they thought it was a prank. The unfamiliar sedan in the driveway, the lawn, neatly trimmed by Ben, the cheerful yellow mums in a new planter by the front step, Alyssa's touch. Then Linda tried her key. Karen said she jammed it in, jiggled it, then rattled the brass knob hard, as if violence could persuade the mechanism. When it didn't budge, she took a step back and stared at the front door like it had spoken a language she didn't understand. She called my name, once, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Mark? Then she started dialing. Inside, Ben Morales opened the door just a crack, the security chain taut. He was polite, young, his voice calm. He said they'd just moved in that morning, gave his name, asked if he could help. Linda laughed then, a sound like breaking ice. You're in my house, she said. Ben, confused, asked her what she meant. That's when Linda started yelling, not words, at first, just a raw sound of disbelief. Alyssa appeared behind Ben, one protective hand cradling the small, hard curve of her stomach. Emily stood frozen on the walkway, her phone hanging limp at her side, her face gone pale beneath the sunglasses. Karen said it was the look on Emily's face that stayed with her, not fear, but a dawning, horrifying comprehension, as if she were watching a trap she'd helped set finally snap shut on someone she'd forgotten was still inside. The police came, 2 officers. One was an older man with a weary mustache who looked like he'd seen this script before. Karen presented the paperwork, the deed, the bill of sale, the title transfer. The officer scanned them, then turned to Linda. Ma'am, he said, his voice flat and final. Whose name is on the deed? Karen told me. Linda didn't answer. She just stood there on her former front walk, the key cold in her fist. And in that silence, the world rearranged itself. My phone rang again. Linda Mobile. I answered on the 4th ring, just as the voicemail was about to take it. Mark. Her voice was a ragged breath. What did you do? I leaned back in the booth, the vinyl creaking under me. Outside, a semi-truck groaned its way onto the highway. Somewhere, a car alarm chirped once and thought better of it. I sold the house, I said. You can't do that. The snap was back, edged with panic. That's our home. Mine and Emily's. It was my house, I said, my voice quieter than hers, and somehow heavier. You just lived in it. Then it came, the torrent. Threats of lawyers, of judges, of taking me for everything. How dare you? She seethed. Rick would never have done something this low. He has honor. Rick. The name hung in the air between us. A ghost finally called to account. There was a fumbling sound, then a different voice, smaller, cracked with tears. Emily, I didn't think you'd really do it, she whispered. The word really broke in half. I didn't think you'd really mean what you said, I replied. I kept my voice steady. It was an effort, a physical act of will, like holding up a heavy beam. A long pause. I could hear Linda in the background, hissing my name like a curse. I raised you, I said finally, the words leaving me slowly, like a last confession. I didn't rent a place in your life. Emily didn't answer. The line went dead. I finished my coffee. It had gone cold, and the bitterness was absolute. The small rental near the river had white walls and the faint, clean smell of someone else's life. That night, I sat at the little 2-person table and unfolded the card I'd found in my new mailbox. It was from Ben and Alyssa, a thank you note for the smooth closing, for the house that already felt like a home. Tucked inside was a grainy black and white ultrasound photo, a little bean-shaped blur they'd named Luna. I held it under the cheap overhead light, and for a moment, I let myself imagine the old dining room, the heavy table, The empty place settings. The head chair pushed neatly in. For the first time, the thought of that empty chair didn't feel like a verdict. It felt like a fact. They filed the complaint a week later. Not for divorce. Linda was still trying to salvage the furniture before the ship fully sank. She went after the house. A Hail Mary pass of legal fury. As if a judge could unsign a signature. Could unsell a sold home. I was served at the rental on a rain-spattered Friday. The papers stiff and formal in the hands of a bored-looking kid on a motorcycle. The Scott County Courthouse smelled the way all courthouses do, of dust, anxiety, and the sharp, citrus-like disinfectant they used to wipe away despair. I wore my one blazer, the one that had seen funerals and dealership anniversaries. It was armor enough. Under my arm, the manila envelope was a familiar, comforting weight. Linda arrived 10 minutes late, her heels a staccato announcement of her outrage on the marble tiles. Emily trailed behind her, a shadow in an expensive-looking sweater, her eyes fixed on her phone screen, and behind them, hands in the pockets of khakis that looked too new, was Rick Donnelly. He wore a small, performative smile, the kind of smile a man wears when he's arrived for the victory lap without having run the race. The mediator, a woman with intelligent eyes and reading glasses on a chain, looked at us over the top of a file. "Let's try to keep this simple," she said, her voice dry. "We're here to discuss property division and the matter of the sale." Linda launched herself into the space before the words had fully left the mediator's mouth. "He abandoned us," she said, her finger cutting the air toward me. "He sold our home out from under us while we were on a family trip. He humiliated my daughter. He's trying to punish us for wanting to be a real family." The mediator held up a patient hand. "Mr. Halverson will have his turn." I waited. I let the words wash over me: sacrifice, promises, family, real family, and watched Rick nod along sagely, as if he had any ledger to consult. When the mediator turned to me, I stood, not aggressively, but with the deliberate motion of a man presenting evidence. I placed the envelope on the polished table. It landed with a soft, definitive thump. "I didn't abandon anyone," I said. My voice was calm, a flat rock in her stream of outrage. "I stopped financing a life I was no longer considered part of." I opened the envelope. I didn't slam the papers down. I slid them forward, one after another, like cards in a game where the rules had suddenly become clear. The deed, my name alone, the mortgage statements, paid from my account, the cruise line invoices, the auto debit confirmations, dates were circled in precise blue pen. Linda scoffed. A brittle sound. "Money. Is that all you think this is about? Money isn't everything, Mark." "You said it was," I replied, looking directly at her for the first time, "when it was mine." The mediator adjusted her glasses and began to read. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper. She took her time. When she looked up, her gaze went to Linda. The property at 2417 East Locust was titled solely in Mr. Halverson's name, purchased prior to the marriage. "That's not fair," Linda insisted, the word a child's protest. "We were married for 14 years. I made that a home." "Yes," the mediator agreed, not unkindly, "but marriage, by itself, does not alter a deed." It was then that Rick leaned forward, inserting himself into the space. "With all due respect," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone, "I'm Emily's father, her real father. That house was her childhood home. She deserved that stability." I turned my head and looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the same easy grin he'd flashed when he'd shown up at Emily's high school graduation, smelling of airport cologne, taking his place in the front row. "Really?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You mean like she deserved child support? Like she deserved a father who showed up?" The air left the room. Rick's smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. "Now, that's a low blow, and it's not relevant." "It's entirely relevant," I said, cutting him off. I tapped the final stack of papers in the envelope, "because I've got the receipts for that, too. The insurance premiums I covered when her coverage lapsed, the tuition shortfall her sophomore year, the new transmission for the Honda at 113,000 miles, the things you missed, Rick, the things you weren't there for." My eyes shifted to Emily. She was staring at me, her face blanched, the tears now spilling over without a sound, but in her wet eyes, There was something else, not just hurt, but a horrible, dawning clarity. She was adding up a column of numbers she never knew existed. The mediator cleared her throat, a sound that brought the room back to its appointed purpose. This proceeding is about legal standing and property law, not personal history, she said, though her eyes lingered on the thick stack of my evidence. Legally, Mr. Halverson acted within his rights as the sole titleholder. The sale was executed properly. Linda slumped back in her chair as if the bones had been removed from her body. So he just wins? She whispered, not to the mediator, but to the universe. I met her shattered gaze. I didn't win, Linda, I said, the fatigue of 14 years finally audible in my voice. I just stopped losing. There was no gavel, no dramatic pronouncement. The mediator simply closed the folder. There is no legal standing here to challenge the sale. This matter is concluded. Outside, the afternoon sun was startlingly bright on the courthouse steps, washing the gray stone in a light that felt like absolution. I stood for a moment, letting the clean, cold air fill my lungs, air that was no longer shared, no longer negotiated. Emily emerged last. She hesitated on the top step, then descended slowly, stopping a few feet away from me. The anger was gone from her. What remained was a raw, young bewilderment. I didn't know, she said, her voice so small it was almost lost to the wind. About all of it, the money, the things you paid for. I know you didn't, I said. I never meant for you to carry that ledger, but knowing now, it matters. She nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. She didn't move to hug me. She didn't offer an apology that would have been too small for the canyon between us. Not yet, but she didn't look away either. I walked to my truck alone. The manila envelope under my arm felt almost weightless. The river was low that fall, revealing mudflats and skeletal roots. The bones of the shore laid bare. I started sitting on a folding chair by the bank most mornings, a thermos of coffee between my feet, watching the water move with a patient, relentless truth. It went around obstacles. It didn't argue with them. The rental was small, but the silence in it was my own. The radio was an old analog thing. You had to turn the dial with a gentle, precise touch to find a clear station. I liked that. Things that require a little patience, a little careful listening, tend to be more honest. Winter announced itself with a razor wind off the water. I bought a thicker coat, learned to cook a single pork chop without burning it, and found I could sleep through the night. Not a dreamless sleep, but a deep one, uninterrupted by the low-grade dread that had been my old bedfellow. Emily texted in late October, when the last of the leaves were surrendering. Can we talk sometime? I held the phone, remembering a different kitchen, a different girl with tears on her algebra homework, leaning into the solid, silent comfort of my shoulder. We can talk, I typed back, when you're ready to listen, too. We met at a coffee shop in a town neither of us knew, neutral ground. She looked older, the softness in her face hardened by a reality she hadn't chosen but had helped create. She didn't tell me, Emily said, stirring her latte long after the sugar had dissolved. About the bills, about how much you covered. I thought it was just what you did. I wasn't keeping score, I said. It was true. I was keeping promises. I thought they were ours. She winced, eyes on the foam in her cup. What I said, about my real dad. I shouldn't have. It wasn't the whole truth. This time, I didn't rush to absorb the blow, to soften it for her. I let the admission hang in the steam between us, let her feel its weight. I'm not asking for a rewind, she said finally, looking up. I didn't understand the cost. That's the thing about costs, I said, my voice softer now. You don't feel them when someone else is paying, you just enjoy the ride. We finished our drinks. We stood. The hug we shared was brief, awkward, the embrace of two people relearning the geography of forgiveness. It wasn't a happy ending. It was the start of an honest one. I could build on that. On Thursdays, I went back to the VFW. Walt was usually on his same stool, a monument to weathered patience. One evening, he studied me over the rim of his glass, then jerked his chin toward the window, toward the invisible river in the dark. You look lighter, he grunted. I am, I said. Turns out silence weighs a hell of a lot less than pretending. A ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Told you, he said, and took a sip. Some nights, in the quiet of my little rental, I would think of the house on East Locust. I'd see the dining room table, the head chair, and remember the careful, habitual motion of pushing it in, of making myself just slightly smaller, of trying not to take up too much space. I don't do that anymore. What I learned, what took me 14 years and one text at 6:42 a.m. to understand, is this: love without respect is just labor. A transaction where only one side is keeping the books, and silence, when you finally choose it for yourself, isn't emptiness. It's the space where you finally get to hear your own voice. If you've ever been quietly edited out of your own story, told your family right up until you're inconvenient, I hope this reminds you, dignity doesn't always make a sound. Sometimes, it's the quiet click of a lock. Sometimes, it's the steady hum of a truck driving west at dawn. Sometimes, it's just the sound of your own breath, finally your own again. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their own worth. For more journeys back to solid ground, follow along.